it did not stop Kenyans from continuing with Fuliza. And now you'll see that in Fuliza, the default rate is nil. With Hustler, the default rate is 20%. And the uptake is low. And this is why Treasury, I think, probably was able to reduce it to 5 billion. So I think probably the expectations people had from government
on a lighter note, I heard C.S. Ndungu say he's actually a member of Hustler Fund. Well, I think he does that as a minister responsible, maybe to monitor the uptake or whatever.
Yes.
But so, I think Mr. Professor Ndungu cannot be that kind of a hustler.
But it's important that we take note, underline what the CS Treasury said about market. Let us incentivize the markets to do their work. If we really looked at what Fuliza is doing, and government looked at, start with Fuliza and probably looked at some of the challenges, they would not need to allocate money to do Fuliza's work. If government looked at incentivized housing, the construction, the contractors, in terms of tax remissions, in terms of, granting bank facilities or lower, so I think then you would not have needed Kenyans to be taxed, 1.5 plus 3% to fund housing. I think the market thing, Bwana CS, Treasury, if it is important that you put your foot down on your colleagues, that let us not try and do everything as government, because that money will come from taxpayers and we don't have the money. On the IPP, Mr. Chairman, I only want to comment and say that there was a very, very good report in September last year on the independent power purchase agreement by the task force, the presidential task force. We need that one to be implemented. It will address all the challenges we have discussed here. Do we have the political will to implement that power purchase agreement task force report, which was very clear, and eminent Kenyans actually spend a lot of time coming up with what needs to be done to address that matter. On the dollar, I think what the CS, I would advise the CS Treasury to do is, even now under his watch, the challenge that the reason why Kenyans are keeping $8 billion in their commercial bank accounts, and they're not, selling it to the bank, is because of the existence of the dual exchange rate. It is there up to now. Let him do away with that. Why would central bank tell you that the exchange rate is 150? When you go and want to buy, it is 156, 157. So I think if that is not there, nobody will keep that money. So the question of the shortage or the would disappear. The tax review I have suggested, that there are actually taxes which are critical, and the most common ones are the levies. These levies are called levies, but they're in forms of taxes, and they're not being used for the purposes for which they were originally intended. This is why I said some of those levies need to be reviewed and need to be removed, really, and they're not adding value except making the cost of production higher. And the ones for fuel has been mentioned, for example, and the ones I have mentioned, things like the one for Agricultural Food Authority, the one RDL, Railway Development, which really it's not being used to service that loan, and so forth. So I think those are some of the taxes that, in my view, needs to be reviewed. Then on the market, the dollar, still on the dollar, I heard the CSA, this thing was managed. But let me tell you, in any country, because of external shocks, to insulate the economy, the manufacturers and businessmen and everyone from sudden volatility, any country you go in this world, central banks do intervene in the exchange rate to avoid that sudden volatility. It is normal. If, for example, the shilling today goes to 200, central bank cannot just sit and wait. Tomorrow, people who are doing businesses, everything, so there'll be chaos. You have to try and go to the market. And this is what I think has been happening in the past. And I think that can still happen. But what we are seeing is that there's need to really address that issue. My worry is that government of Kenya seems to depend on IMF. That IMF tells you your sharing is overvalued, and so we just go back and say, okay, and relax. But I think we need to look at the economy critically and to avoid that kind of thing. Mr. Chairman, 2 or 3 others I just want to mention very quickly. One, for the cost of living. For cost of living, I think, and I've said it very clearly in my report, we must review every policy and regulatory proposal in terms of its impact on the cost of living before cabinet and parliament approval is sought. I think this is important because you see every day, a department, a ministry, coming up with something. We're going to introduce this. We're going to charge this. We're going to change this. Every change of policy that has an impact on the cost of living should not be taken, to cabinet and parliament until it has been examined clearly in terms of its impact on the cost of living. I think this is important. There was a bill last year in 2021 before Parliament to amend the PFM, Public Finance Management Act, to give members of Parliament to require that all loans must get prior approval from Parliament before Treasury signs the dotted lines. I think that is critical, gentlemen and ladies. This is critical. Otherwise, we will continue getting Parliament as a rubber stamp, approving loans which have been signed in London, in Korea, in Japan, anywhere. And I think it's something that law needs to be revisited. It's critical. Chairman, very quickly, the last two I want to mention is that, in my view, to address these challenges on the economy, because there is a disconnect between what Kenyans feel about the state of the economy and what needs to be done and what the government thinks. I think it's time we have a national convention on the status of the economy with the right stakeholders. You have to get, the people who are in business, you have to get the professional and business organizations and forums, you have to get the farmers, the industries, and so forth. Let us discuss really this issue about our economy, because there are challenges. Government does not engage adequately with business. That is the challenge. And so we can't just, as government, come up with rules and regulations and then businesses feel there sometimes. And there are sectors where people are engaged, but I think there are many, and there's benefit. It will give government an opportunity also to listen. Listen to the farmers. Listen to the industry, to investors, to SMEs. That is very important. Instead of just, a top-down approach. Lastly, I think I want to conclude by saying that the question of spending, as Dr. Ruto said, is critical. Unless we cut our clothes to our size, we will continue to be talking in these forums. And I think the argument by Treasury, and I heard what the CS said, that we cannot just, which expenses will be cut. I think clearly what we know is that if you take a pen and paper and go through the printed estimates, really, there are things which are not a priority. There are things which you can defer. Even needs can be deferred so that you don't get into a bigger crisis. I think it's important we review the question of spending so that we can keep this country in one piece. Otherwise, we will go over the precipice. This is my thoughts. Thank you very much.
We thank you, Honorable Bill Okero. Do we follow that order?
Yeah.
We follow that order. Okay, thank you. Okay, Dr. Abram.
Thank you, Co-Chairs. I was asked two questions. One, Bill has responded to a bit, but first I was asked, is it true that 80% of Kenyans, I want to also encourage the PS for housing to refer to national statistics. He referred to documents by other people out there. We have a national census 2019, which is what we use. This is what it says. There are 12.1 million households in this country. They are divided between rural and urban. Rural are 7.4, urban are 4.7. 86%, that is 6.3 in rural, own their own homes. That's the figure I was referring to. Maybe just to clarify that. Yes, 86. And if you had my comment, I was saying, what is the need in the rural areas for building houses? Because he said he has written to every member of parliament asking for land. I don't think even any MP owns land in the first place, public land, but that's a story for another day. And 21.3 in urban areas own their own homes. The rest rent. A good number rent. The question is, do they have a problem renting? Is there anything across the world? Most populations live in rented homes. rented houses. Of course, we have a challenge. Is a challenge actually that there are no houses or that people cannot afford mortgages? I think let's address the right challenge. And that's why I say I think there's still a lot to be discussed around the housing. I will not belabor that. What to do with, why say cut taxes on one side and at the same time cut spending? Is indeed a contradictory. It is not. The reason for that is that the more we discuss this as purely a revenue problem, the more we get it wrong, in my opinion. Because we seem to say all our expenditures are right. I gave an example of the state-owned enterprises. If you go through the levies, a lot of those levies and rates are charged to maintain these state-owned enterprises because they have to get some money to keep them going, because that's basically what they established, and agencies. And in my opinion, I think that it will be of value to, first of all, look at, remember those institutions, just to take us one step back, are also playing in this intergovernmental space where between counties and national government. Look at the number of them in the water sector. Look at the number of them, in the different frameworks, and we seem to be even creating more with the law. So there is a possibility to actually look at the efficiencies, and the Auditor General is on record, just flagging out expenditures that were not right. If you work on all those numbers, including the 2 billion that the current government has committed to confirm whether it's true that, as per the former president, that we lose 2 billion every day. If you do the math, if you were to cursorily look at that figure, 2 billion per day gives you about 710 billion in a year. That gives you almost the deficit that we are talking about. So there are options, and the options is not just going and saying, let's raid this ministry and cut their expenditure, but it has to be a mix. Look at the tax expenditures, already some improvements there. That is the amount of money we give in terms of rebates. Why not go and reduce that so that we give rebates to Kenyans in terms of their, and the rest is what we've talked about, the fuel. Must we charge everything? Because we are saying we are not in normal times. Yet there is something we can do. The last question, which was about KQ, I think a lot of these state-owned enterprises need to run on a business model. You don't make a profit, you don't run, you shut down. We don't go to save every other company out there. We should actually be saving, because right now, as we hear of capital flight, we should actually be working to save that. So we cannot continue to save companies that are not performing, yet performing, doing business. Kenya Airways, anybody who flies with Kenya Airways, despite the delays here and there, is fairly full. At least I have fallen. It's always fairly full. So I don't understand where the loss comes from, and it's the most expensive, just to also say, so those are my thoughts, and happy to continue with this conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Abraham. We will now, I think we go to the PS, don't you think so? PS Inga, and then we come to the CSS. But even as you do so, the few houses that Kenyans have put up for themselves get demolished. That's the house, that's your department. And some of them are really very, very expensive houses. And yet we heard from Hassan Omar's Kenya Kwanza government that the demolition be a thing of the past. So what happened in Mavoko is heart-rending. Does it prick your conscience? Does it really? Just for me, I should have put this to you, because you're such a marketer and I know you. So today we are not going to get you to sweat, but please think about some of those things.
No, you want me to start sweating, and I think I had done pretty well. If I was to answer the questions in a methodical way from the co-chair and the majority leader, he spoke about, other than the hinges, these other items, what is the policy intervention? One, what we have done is we have identified the 69. Number two, we have standardized them. It's very, very important. Why standardization? In Kenya, we don't have a standard door. We don't. Because a door in Kenya is basically the space that you leave after you finish building your house. Meaning that you must get a fundi to come and customize your door. And if we continue on that line, we will never be able to benefit from the large economies of scale. So it is important that, first of all, we standardize, and we have done the standard. We have come up with what is called a Juakali manual, which is available. We have given it to them, and with the standards for those 69 items. The next thing is to take this thing to Parliament so that it becomes now entrenched. We are discussing with our committee whether it is going to be as a bill or as a policy. I understand that there is somebody who had brought in a bill in Parliament. We'll see whether we can be able to ride on it. Your Excellency, the Honorable Vice Chair, I think when we talk about the housing levy being an investment in ourselves, we are actually not. We're not using it incorrectly. We are investing in ourselves. And how do we invest in ourselves?
But is it a tax? You need to come out clearly.
It is a tax. Yeah.
So
But
why do you call it a levy in your presentation?
A levy is a tax.
A levy and a tax, there's no difference.
Actually, just go take the definition of a levy from what do you call it? Wikipedia. It is a tax. Okay.
And the CS calls it an investment. It's a bit confusing.
The effect is an investment. We're investing in ourselves, okay? Because we are taking that money and putting it in productive sectors that are going to be very important in the creation of jobs.
But Mr. Hinga, let's be clear. You say a levy is a tax.
Yes.
Now, my own understanding, we've heard it from here, from various centers. A task, if it is a housing tax, then everybody, irrespective of who they are, will be subject to that tax.
Correct.
To tax. But if it's a levy, then you can even go on a voluntary basis. Those who want to, because there are people, for example, who are in their 60s, going to retire, or may have retired, and they're paying a housing tax. So they ask themselves, how will this benefit me? Because I'm just about to retire. But if it is a tax, and of course they have to pay. And that is a punitive aspect that Eugene was talking about. Yeah.
I think from the PS, the CS's presentation is calling it an investment. An investment can be voluntary. And, according to the priority of either that teacher, that lawyer, that doctor, that policeman. But what is oppressive about this is that you must pay it as an employer. It's cutting both ways,
yep,
including people losing their jobs because they can't sustain this.
Correct.
Yeah, Chair. The CS didn't just refer to it as an investment. He actually qualified it further and said that this is an investment, not a tax.
Yes.
Please help us understand.
Not a tax. Now you are contradicting your own senior colleague there.
I said I'll come and rectify that because it's right up. Let me come at my turn to try and rectify that.
Yeah, but as of now, we are hearing from Wanahinga that this is a tax.
This is a tax.
And in fact, just CS actually called it an intervention. I heard you say it's an intervention. I knew it was a tax. Everybody knows it was a tax. When we dropped it as an issue of a saving, it was immediately communicated on Parliament as a tax. So I don't know where that misunderstanding has come from the last day of this presentation.
Okay, and
let's clarify. This housing levy is based on an amendment to the Employment Act.
Correct.
So it cannot be a tax.
It is a levy, which is a tax.
This is one government, but you are mixing us. The taxation was done through amendment to the Employment Act. So it cannot. Yeah.
All right.
Which is which?
I will leave the CS Treasury to handle the issue of the tax because I don't want to speak out of turn. Now, so the question was, you gave a very good example, the Honorable Excellency Co-Chair, about Egypt. And I think that's a very good example. But I don't know whether you've realized that for Egypt to be where they are today, in the year 2014, they made a determination to go on the same journey that we are starting today. They built new cities. They built, how many units they built? Is it 1 million? Huh? They've done between 700 and 1 million units in the last, since 2014, the last 9 years. So you're right. But we cannot say we now take our jobs to Egypt.
Not by overtaxing Egyptians.
No, there is a tax.
The context was different, but please continue. I don't want you to sweat for sure.
No. Sweating is biblical according to my CS. So, anyway,
overtaxing is also biblical. You heard of the donkey who spoke to Balaam.
I think you need to be fair to Hinga. Yeah, just let him answer the questions.
Okay.
Yeah, and then let the other clarities, whether it's a tax, whether it's not a tax, be given. And we then come and make recommendations as is, because we are really trying to ridicule a few things here.
Yeah.
So we also avoid many distractions as he's speaking, kindly.
Thank you. So the journey that Egypt took is a journey that we want to take. I know a lot of people say, don't talk about Singapore. Because in the 1960s, it's the same journey they took today. 90% of all Singaporeans live in a publicly delivered house. The issue of using the levy, again, is not unique to Kenyans. We have benchmarked widely. Any country that has ever resolved their housing issues, there has got to be ring-fenced capital. There has got to be long-term capital. So that's why if you go to Mexico, and I know there are some bad examples in terms of Mexico that we have also benchmarked and seen some of the things we must avoid doing. So Mexico has the levy. If you go to our neighbors, Nigeria, they have a levy. China has a levy. We can have a whole study that is actually uploaded. If only we can download and read. The entire benchmarking study is already been given. Now, I think the Honorable Co-Chair, you asked a very fundamental question. That the cost of establishing a manufacturing plant in Kenya is expensive. Now, but I also think if that is a statement of fact, it is incumbent on us as leaders to change that. Because manufacturing does not just happen because you wish it. Manufacturing happens because you have a concrete plan. And that concrete plan must be driven by a demand for something. If there is no demand for something, there is no private sector person who is going to risk their money. That I'm just going to manufacture doors and wish and hope that the houses will be built. The market, as my senior has said, it needs to be nurtured. So we are nurturing the market, okay, by creating that consumptive demand, which is then going to anchor our manufacturing and is going to give us jobs. You know, I dare say that the existential risk of our country today is this issue of unemployment. This must be in every other word that you talk about as members of parliament. We must talk about how do we solve unemployment. And sometimes we put aside our whatever caps that we are wearing so that we can, it's a patriotic duty for all of us to find a solution to this thing called unemployment. You may disagree with how I want to do it. I may disagree with how you want to do it, but let's not run away from the fact that it is a big problem. Now, some statement was made about why don't we take this money and build classrooms? And I find that quite interesting. What money are you taking? Because unless you're saying that the housing levy application should go to building classrooms, the reason why we have this housing levy is because there is no fiscal space. There was no other way of funding this agenda. So you needed to come up with a plan to be able to get that capital. But let me assure you that our housing plan is not just about 4 walls and a roof. No. It is a whole ecosystem where we are building schools close to where people live. One of the reasons why we have traffic in these cities of ours, Nairobi, is because our cities have grown in an unplanned way. We have built schools in one end, we live in another end, and we work in another place. That's why we have perpetual jam. So what are we doing? We are making sure that all these homes that we are building, there is a school within walking distance. So go and look at all the affordable housing programs that we have launched. We have a school, we have a clinic, we have a market. Why? Because this is about human settlements. It's not just about housing. So I think that's a very important point for all of us to be able to appreciate. I really feel uncomfortable to try and take on my former boss, Eugene, on something that I don't think is a statement of fact. Number one, Jubilee government never abolished its affordable housing program. Never. I was a PS in charge from day one to the last day. And until the last day, we were still chasing our housing agenda. And I actually want to use this as a very good example as to why we did not succeed and why we are succeeding now. And it goes to, there is nothing that has changed in the architecture. What has changed is that right now, we have got the resources to do it. In the last government, we didn't have it because it went to court, it stayed in court. By the way, the courts never ruled. It stayed in court, it was frustrated. There were like 13 cases being opened every day. We know how it works in Kenya. But then eventually, the former president in December of 2019, I remember very well because it was Jamhuri Day, he directed that we move it from mandatory to voluntary. Now, let me tell you what the effect was. The effect was we had projected to be collecting somewhere between 6 and 7 billion a month. But between 2019 to 2022, when the Jubilee government came to an end, we had not collected more than 1.8 billion. Many years, we only collected less than 1.8. We collected less than 2 billion. Yet, we were hoping that we were going to collect 6 to 7 billion. So that is really the crux of the issue. It is not that it was a bad plan. It's not that this plan has fundamentally changed. The only thing that has changed is that we have now a funding mechanism. And even during COVID time, we were looking at sectors that we were going to revive, and housing was still one of the sectors. Unfortunately, there was no money. So if the taxpayers' existing funds cannot fund that agenda, then it did not take off. So if we go back to the fundamental reason why we are so passionate about housing, its importance in the economy, its importance in the creation of jobs, we can already see. I dare actually request this committee that next time you come and accompany me, we go to Mukuru Kojenga, here, meteorological site. You find close to 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 young people that are working there. Those are jobs we didn't have, but we have them today. Today, we should look at any sector that is going to create jobs, and we must go for it. Kibera, by end of this month, will be having 5,000 people from the slum of Kibera working on that site. Those are people who did not have a job. When you go to Roiro, where we are building some 1,000 units, we have got over 2,000 young people working in those. Homa Bay, same thing. So I think it's important to understand the economics of housing and already the change that is happening. But it is gradual, and as we scale, you will now start to feel it. Then let me go to the Honorable Wambilinga. Wambilianga, sorry. My apologies for that. I think you're lucky I didn't exchange the R and the L there. So it will have been worse. Joking. One of the critical areas that we have looked at is targeted groups. This affirmative action, because this program is actually finally going to have us realize the social dividend that is in our laws but has never been implemented, the 30% rule. That's why when we went to Starehe, when we were launching Starehe, we took a women group from Babadogo. They are part of what is called the Build Her. And by the way, those young ladies, most of them single mothers, are building wonderful products. They are doing all our joineries and our finishes. They are doing an excellent job. As though you knew I was coming here, this morning I was just chatting with the advisor to the president on gender, because I have gone out there and said, where are the women in construction? Because we have ring-fenced it. We want the women in construction to take advantage of this particular agenda. So people living with disabilities, women, and young people are a key focus on this agenda, and there is something in there for them. And so in the coming days, as we roll out, you should be able to see that we are launching all these various chapters at the same time. Honorable Wandai, who I must disclose that is a good friend of mine. Honorable Wandai supported me in the housing levy in the last government. And when I saw him arguing so hard against this time around, and I know he'll say it's the cost of living. Anyway, we'll have that drink because now there is a question that you have asked about the 7.5 billion that has been cut. It's not 10 billion. It is about 7.5 billion. I think unless they increased it, it will have changed. But the last time I checked was 7.5 billion. So CS, I hope is not.
We are meeting the teams.
I'm going to Bunge after this, actually. So if it is a shock. Now, it is not a cut in the levy, because the levy is absolute.
Yeah.
Okay? What has been cut from my budget was the GOK. I was also drawing down a GOK funding of about 10.8 billion, okay, for my other programs. So they are told there's 3 billion which they can't touch, I was told, which is for markets. Okay, those ones, I think, unless there is an issue, that one they should not be touching. So I suspect it is 7.5. Now, you've asked the question, what is the current collection? I want to state that as at the end of October, 31st of October, we had 16.24 billion that had been collected. There was a question you asked about the deferring of expenditure from the fund. I did not really understand what you asked. So I don't know, maybe you want to rephrase it? Okay, thank you. Okay, now, the issue about Public Service Commission is very interesting because I believe, if I'm not wrong, and the CS can back me here, and you can see the handkerchief, the magic handkerchief is out. The CS can back me up here, but I think all public servants got an increase in salary before the effect of the levy. So maybe we can have a sitting with the chair of public service. But you say something which is understandable, that that they're about the head of public service said about 12.5 Kenyans or public servant as going through psychological challenges and so on and so forth. And I understand it is true. And it's not just them. There are even others who have been laid off, and there are others who have never seen what is a job. So, and that's why I say that sometimes, and allow me to say this with the greatest degree of respect, that leadership is a very difficult thing. Leadership is very tough. Because, and especially if you're a politician, because sometimes, some of the decisions you're going to make might have an impact on whether you're coming back again or not. And I think that is important. But I also believe that true leadership is about rising above, our own personal interest and seeing the bigger picture. Today, I reflected and I realized.
And I hope with that you try to wind up.
Okay, that's fine. Sorry, I preach a lot, so I won't do I'll avoid the altar call. On a later note. So I reflected and I realized that during the COVID time, I had the chance of being in a room with the former president. And let me tell you, I saw the weight of a country on the shoulders of one man. I can imagine the same thing that is going on with our current president, when every index and matrices are very difficult. And sometimes you have got to guide the country. And so I don't think leadership is an easy thing. So there are many Kenyans today that are 1 meal away from starvation. There are many Kenyans who have no jobs today. And as I say, that should be on our lips. How are we going to create jobs? Let's argue that my plan does not do enough. But let's not say we will not create those jobs. Lastly, Abraham makes some very interesting points. Very interesting points. Now, number one, in rural areas, what is the challenge we're having in housing in rural areas? You all know. Honorable Tiende will show you every other weekend he's building mud houses in Rariena, there are other places. Why? Because our rural folks, first of all, the material they have used to construct is not the right material, number one. Number two, we having people who are fragmenting land that is meant for arable, arable land for settlements. We are dividing all our arable land, and yet we complain that we don't have sufficient food. Number three, I don't know whether you've heard about something which is called rural slums. Our rural areas have also become slums. Okay, so the plan that we have, obviously, largely is an urban issue. That is important to state. But in the rural areas, at the same time, we have the issue of land fragmentation. So what are we doing? In Muranga, for example, we are looking at a big chunk of land where we can build 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 housing units in one settlement. One settlement. And what do we want to do? We're going to build it as a new city. So there will be all the amenities, and we want the people to live there and wake up and go to farm and then come back home, rather than continue fragmenting. And we want to take that to Kisii. There is no land left in Kisii. In some of these places, you know that there is a whole land fragmentation issue. So rural housing, we have a different program than the urban. Now, on urban side, 92% of the people in Nairobi, they rent. Now, the question that we need to ask ourselves, do you rent because you like renting, or you rent because you have no chance of owning? And the latter is the truth. Okay? So, and why are we saying owning is important? For us, owning is very, very, very important, because that house that you have earned, that you have owned, you can even use it as a collateral to go and start a business. You can use that home and bequeath it to your kids. So there is a whole plan that the Honorable Co-Chair, I would really like to have sufficient time to come and take you through, so that you understand that the plan is well thought out.
Thank you. Now, I think we'll hear Davis.
Thank you again. Excellency, I'll be very brief.
And as wordy as...
I'll be very brief, Your Excellency. Thank you again. Thank you, members of this national dialogue. The one that I want us to correct from the onset is where Honorable Ichungwa did raise a concern about a bit of misinformation regarding what Citizen and KPC have